The dust from the approaching stagecoach had been visible for nearly 20 minutes before it finally rumbled into Columbus, New Mexico territory. But Katherine Daniels hardly noticed. She was too busy scanning the faces of those waiting at the depot, her heart sinking further with each passing minute. The year was 1885, and the promise that had brought her across half the country was evaporating like morning dew under the harsh southwestern sun. Final stop, Columbus. The driver called out, setting the brake with a squeal that matched the desperation Katherine felt building inside her chest. She stepped down carefully from the coach, her green traveling dress once crisp and proper when she'd left St. Louis 2 weeks ago, now wrinkled and stained with the evidence of her journey. Katherine clutched her small valise tightly against her side, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight as she turned in a slow circle. No one approached her. No one called her name. The other passengers dispersed quickly, greeted by family or friends, their laughter and chatter only highlighting her isolation. The driver tossed down her trunk with little ceremony and was already climbing back to his seat. "Excuse me," she called up to him. "Is this the only depot in Columbus?" The driver nodded, not unkindly. "Yes, madam, only one we got. Someone's supposed to meet you." Katherine swallowed hard. "My uncle, Uncle Frederick. He wrote that he would be here." The driver's expression softened with pity. "Fred Daniels. Ain't heard that name in these parts for some time, madam." "Maybe 6 months." A cold sensation spread through Katherine's chest. "That can't be. I received his letter just 8 weeks ago." The driver only shrugged. "Depot closes at sundown, madam. Town's got a boarding house 2 streets over." With a flick of his wrist, he set the stagecoach in motion again, leaving Katherine alone with her trunk and crushing realization. She remained rooted to the spot, unwilling to accept what was happening. Her uncle's letter had been so specific. "Come to Columbus," he'd written. "I've established myself well here. There's opportunity for a young woman of good breeding, teaching positions, respectable society." Now she stood alone in a frontier town with $12 to her name and no prospects. "Excuse me, miss." Katherine turned to find a tall man regarding her with curiosity. His clothes were dusty, but well made, a dark vest over a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a cowboy hat held respectfully in his hands. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. "I couldn't help overhearing," he continued. "You're looking for Fred Daniels." Hope flickered in Katherine's chest. "Yes. Do you know him? Do you know where I might find him?" The man's expression grew troubled. "I'm sorry, madam. Fred Daniels passed away this spring. Influenza took him and quite a few others." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, and the stranger stepped forward as if to catch her should she fall. "I'm Nathan Taylor," he said, his voice gentler now. "I was waiting for my sister's arrival, but it seems her train's been delayed. She sent a telegraph this morning." Katherine barely registered his words, her mind spinning with the implications of her situation. Orphaned at 19, she'd worked as a seamstress in St. Louis until her fingers bled, sleeping in a crowded boarding house and saving every penny. Her uncle's letter had seemed like Providence, her only living relative offering sanctuary and opportunity. "Miss, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "I just need to think." The depot was emptying now. The station master was locking up the ticket office. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the platform. Nathan Taylor studied her for a long moment. Then he did something that would alter the course of both their lives. "Come with me," he said simply, reaching for her trunk. "You shouldn't be alone right now." Katherine stared at him, this stranger with kind eyes who was now her only tenuous connection in this unfamiliar place. "I don't even know you, Mr. Taylor." "No, you don't," he agreed. "But I knew your uncle. He was a good man. And Columbus isn't the sort of place where a lady should find herself alone at sunset with nowhere to go." He paused, then added, "I own the Mercantile on Main Street. There's a small apartment above it. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out what's best to be done." Katherine hesitated, weighing her limited options. She could seek out the boarding house with her meager funds, which would last perhaps a week. Or she could trust this man who'd known her uncle. "I would be grateful for your assistance, Mr. Taylor," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just for tonight." Nathan nodded once and lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "This way, Miss Daniels." As they walked away from the depot, Katherine couldn't have known that this moment of desperation would become the first step toward a life she never imagined possible. The sun continued its descent behind them, painting the dusty street gold and red, as Nathan led her toward Main Street and the beginning of their shared story. Columbus was smaller than Katherine had imagined from her uncle's letters. The Main Street consisted of a dozen or so buildings: the Mercantile, a saloon, a small hotel, a bank, and various other businesses. People nodded respectfully to Nathan as they passed, curious glances lingering on Katherine. "Your uncle spoke of you," Nathan said as they walked. "He was proud to have a niece with education." "You knew him well?" Katherine asked, struggling to keep pace with Nathan's long strides. "Well enough. Columbus isn't a large place. He supplied lumber for my shelving when I opened the Mercantile 2 years ago." Nathan slowed his pace, seeming to realize she was having difficulty keeping up. "He mentioned you were teaching in St. Louis." "I was a seamstress," Katherine corrected. "Though I had hoped to teach here. I completed 2 years at the Women's College in St. Louis before my parents passed." Nathan nodded, processing this information. Teaching positions are scarce, but not impossible. The town's growing. They arrived at a 2-story building with a freshly painted sign, "Taylor's Mercantile." Nathan set down her trunk to unlock the door, then ushered her inside. The store was meticulously organized shelves stocked with canned goods, tools, fabric, and household necessities. A glass case displayed more valuable items: watches, jewelry, and fine writing instruments. The space smelled of coffee, leather, and the faint sweetness of hard candy. "This is impressive," Katherine said, genuinely surprised by the establishment's quality. Nathan's expression warmed slightly at the compliment. "Thank you. I came west with very little 5 years ago. The Mercantile represents a great deal of work." He led her to a narrow staircase at the back of the store. "The apartment isn't much, but it's clean." The rooms above the store were indeed small but surprisingly comfortable. A sitting area with 2 chairs and a small table opened to a compact kitchen. Through another door, Katherine glimpsed a bedroom with a neatly made bed. "This is where you live?" she asked. Nathan shook his head. "I have a small house at the edge of town. I keep this for visitors or when business requires me to stay late." He placed her trunk in the bedroom. "There's a pump in the kitchen. The stove works well. I'll bring up some food from downstairs." Katherine stood awkwardly in the center of the sitting room, overwhelmed by the stranger's kindness and her own precarious situation. "Mr. Taylor, I don't know how to thank you, or how to repay you." "No need for either," he replied firmly. "Your uncle was respected here. This is what neighbors do." When he returned with a basket of provisions: bread, cheese, preserves, and coffee, Katherine had removed her hat and gloves and was standing by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I'll leave you to rest," Nathan said, placing the basket on the kitchen table. The store opens at 7, but I'll be here earlier. We can discuss your plans then." "My plans," Katherine echoed hollowly. "I'm not sure I have any now." Nathan paused at the door. "Miss Daniels, I don't mean to presume, but you seem a capable woman. Columbus might not be what you expected, but it's a place where people can start again." I did. His expression was difficult to read in the dim light. "Rest. Things often look different in the morning." After he left, Katherine sat heavily in one of the chairs. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave. Her uncle dead. Her prospects vanished. A stranger's kindness the only thing standing between her and complete destitution. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of tears. Then she washed her face, ate a small portion of the provisions Nathan had provided, and prepared for bed. Whatever tomorrow would bring, she would face it with clear eyes and a determined heart. Dawn came early in Columbus. Katherine woke to the sounds of the town coming to life, wagons rolling past, voices calling greetings, the distant whistle of a train. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a practical navy blue that showed less dust than her green traveling outfit. After washing her face and arranging her dark brown hair in a simple knot, she felt more prepared to face whatever challenges awaited. She found Nathan already in the store below, moving crates and organizing merchandise. He looked up when she descended the stairs, surprise briefly crossing his features. "Miss Daniels, I didn't expect you so early. I've never been one to lie abed, Mr. Taylor." She clasped her hands in front of her, determined to appear composed despite her uncertainty. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness last night." Nathan nodded, setting down the crate he'd been lifting. "Have you thought about what you might do?" Katherine had indeed spent much of the night considering her options, none of which seemed particularly promising. "I thought perhaps I might inquire about work at the hotel, or see if any families need a governess." "The Riverside Hotel might need help," Nathan agreed, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea. "Though Mrs. Holloway runs a strict establishment." Before Katherine could respond, the bell above the door jingled and an older woman entered, her gray hair neatly tucked beneath a practical bonnet. "Nathan Taylor, you promised those linens would arrive last week," the woman said without preamble, then stopped short when she noticed Katherine. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Mrs. Buchanan, may I introduce Miss Katherine Daniels," Nathan said smoothly. "She's Fred Daniels' niece, newly arrived from St. Louis. Miss Daniels, this is Mrs. Alina Buchanan, who runs our local boarding house." "Fred's niece, Mrs." Buchanan exclaimed, her expression softening. "My dear, I was so sorry to hear about your uncle. A finer gentleman you couldn't find in these parts." "Thank you," Katherine said, touched by the woman's sincerity. "I'm afraid I only just learned of his passing when I arrived yesterday, Mrs." Buchanan's eyes widened. "You came all this way not knowing. Oh, my dear girl." She turned accusingly to Nathan. "And where did she stay last night, Mr. Taylor?" Nathan, to Katherine's surprise, looked slightly uncomfortable. "I offered the apartment upstairs. It seemed the proper thing to do." Mrs. Buchanan sniffed disapprovingly. "Next time you send young ladies my way, Nathan Taylor, it's hardly appropriate for a single woman to stay above a bachelor's place of business." She turned back to Katherine. "No offense to you, my dear, you weren't to know." "None taken," Katherine assured her, though she felt her cheeks warming. She hadn't considered how her accepting Nathan's offer might appear to the townspeople. "Actually, Mrs. Buchanan," Nathan interjected, "Miss Daniels is looking for employment. I believe she has experience as a seamstress." Mrs. Buchanan studied Katherine with new interest. "Is that so? Well, we lost our town seamstress to marriage last spring. She moved to Tucson with her new husband." She tapped a finger against her cheek thoughtfully. "Can you also cook, Miss Daniels?" "Yes, madam." I managed the kitchen at my boarding house in St. Louis for a time. Mrs. Buchanan nodded decisively. I could use help at the boarding house. Room and board plus a small wage. Nothing extravagant, mind you, but honest work. Catherine's heart leapt. It wasn't teaching, but it was respectable employment with lodging included exactly what she needed most urgently. I would be most grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Buchanan. Good, that's settled then. The older woman looked pleased. You can start today. Come by with your things this afternoon. She turned back to Nathan. Now about those linens. Nathan cleared his throat. They arrived on yesterday's freight. I'll have them delivered to you by noon. Excellent. Mrs. Buchanan patted Catherine's arm. I'll see you later, my dear. The boarding house is just 2 streets over the large white house with blue trim. You can't miss it. After Mrs. Buchanan departed, Katherine turned to Nathan, relief evident in her expression. That was fortunate. Nathan nodded, though something in his manner seemed reserved. Mrs. Buchanan is a good woman, if a bit formidable. You'll be properly situated there. Thanks to your introduction, Katherine pointed out. I'm beginning to think you're my guardian angel, Mr. Taylor. The comment brought a flush to Nathan's tanned face. Hardly that, Miss Daniels. Just trying to be neighborly. He hesitated, then added, I should mention that your uncle's property might still be of some value to you. Catherine's eyebrows rose. His property? He had a small house and workshop at the edge of town. As his next of kin, I imagine it would pass to you. You might want to speak with Mr. Fowler at the bank about it. This news rekindled a spark of hope in Catherine's chest. If her uncle had left property, perhaps her situation wasn't as dire as she'd feared. I'll do that. Thank you for telling me. Nathan turned back to his crates. I have deliveries to make this morning, but I'd be happy to accompany you to the bank tomorrow, if you'd like. That would be most helpful, Katherine said, suddenly aware that she'd been alone with this man for quite some time. Mrs. Buchanan's comments about propriety echoed in her mind. I should prepare my things for moving to the boarding house. Nathan worked silently for a moment, then said without looking up, My sister Margaret was supposed to arrive yesterday. She's coming to stay with me after her husband's passing. The sudden change in subject surprised Katherine. I'm sorry for her loss. Thank you. She's young, only 22. Her husband was a cavalry officer stationed at Fort Bliss. Fever took him 3 months ago. Nathan straightened, meeting Catherine's gaze directly. I mention this because she'll be in a situation not unlike yours, starting fresh in a place she doesn't know well. Katherine nodded, understanding his meaning. Perhaps we might become friends then. I think she would like that. Nathan's expression softened. Margaret's expected on today's train. I'll be heading back to the depot this afternoon. Then I wish you a happy reunion, Katherine said. And thank you again, Mr. Taylor, for everything. As she climbed the stairs to gather her belongings, Katherine felt oddly reluctant to leave. Nathan Taylor was a stranger, yet in less than a day, he'd become her most significant connection in Columbus. She reminded herself that this was for the best proper employment, respectable lodging, and the possibility of her uncle's property, representing a more stable future than she'd dared hope for just hours ago. Still, as she packed her valise, she found herself glancing out the window toward the street below, where she could see Nathan loading a wagon with the promised linens for Mrs. Buchanan's boarding house. There was something about his quiet competence and unassuming kindness that lingered in her thoughts. That afternoon, Katherine settled into a small but clean room at the boarding house. Mrs. Buchanan proved to be efficiently welcoming, showing Katherine the sewing room where she would work, the kitchen where she would assist with meals, and introducing her to the other boarders' 2 elderly sisters, a young bank clerk and a widowed schoolteacher. We serve breakfast at 6:30 and supper at 6, Mrs. Buchanan explained. Boarders make their own arrangements for the midday meal. Sundays, we have a special dinner after church. It sounds very orderly, Katherine said approvingly. I run a proper establishment, Mrs. Buchanan confirmed. No gentlemen visitors in the rooms, of course. They may be received in the parlor until 8 in the evening. Katherine smiled. I don't anticipate having gentlemen visitors, Mrs. Buchanan. The older woman gave her a knowing look. Perhaps not yet, my dear, but you're a lovely young woman. Columbus has its share of eligible bachelors. Speaking of which, she lowered her voice slightly. Nathan Taylor is one of our town's most respected citizens. Came here with nothing 5 years ago, built that store from the ground up. Never seen a man work harder. Katherine wasn't sure how to respond to this apparent non sequitur. He's been very kind to me. He's kind to everyone, Mrs. Buchanan said with a hint of exasperation. That's part of the problem. Half the young ladies in town have set their caps for him, but he's too busy with that store to notice. She patted Katherine's arm. Just something to keep in mind, dear. With that cryptic comment, Mrs. Buchanan left Katherine to unpack. As she arranged her few possessions in the room, Katherine pondered the older woman's words. She certainly hadn't been thinking of Nathan Taylor in romantic terms. Her situation was far too precarious for such considerations. Yet she couldn't deny he'd made an impression on her. Katherine spent the remainder of the afternoon assisting Mrs. Buchanan with dinner preparations and mending tablecloths. The work was familiar and soothing, allowing her mind to process the dramatic changes of the past 24 hours. The following morning, after helping with breakfast, Katherine put on her best bonnet and made her way to Taylor's Mercantile. Nathan had promised to accompany her to the bank, and despite Mrs. Buchanan's insinuations, Katherine saw his offer as nothing more than continued kindness to a newcomer. The store was busy when she arrived, with Nathan assisting an elderly gentleman select a new pipe while a young woman waited to purchase fabric. Katherine waited patiently near the door, observing the easy way Nathan interacted with his customers, respectful, knowledgeable, with occasional flashes of dry humor that surprised a laugh from even the most serious patrons. When the store emptied momentarily, Nathan noticed her. Miss Daniels. Good morning. His smile was warm but restrained. I hope you found the boarding house satisfactory. Very much so, Katherine confirmed. Mrs. Buchanan has already put me to work, which I appreciate. Nathan nodded approvingly. She mentioned you're quite skilled with a needle. Your sister arrived safely yesterday, Katherine inquired. A shadow crossed Nathan's face. No, there was another telegram. She's been delayed again. Some issue with settling her husband's affairs at Fort Bliss. He glanced at the clock on the wall. The bank will be open now, shall we? They walked side by side down Main Street, Nathan tipping his hat to passers-by, occasionally introducing Katherine as Fred Daniels' niece from St. Louis. Each time, she was met with expressions of sympathy and welcome that eased some of the tension she'd carried since arriving. People seem to have thought highly of my uncle, she commented. He was respected, Nathan agreed. Kept to himself mostly, but was always willing to help when needed. Fine craftsman, too. Did you know he built the church altar? Katherine shook her head. We hadn't corresponded regularly until recently. My father, his brother, and he had some disagreement years ago. Families are complicated, Nathan said simply, leaving room for her to elaborate or not as she chose. She appreciated his lack of prying. Yes, they are. The bank was a solid brick building with First Bank of Columbus painted in gold lettering across the window. Inside, Mr. Fowler, a balding man with spectacles and an air of cautious prosperity, greeted them with formal courtesy. Miss Daniels, Mr. Taylor, what can I do for you today? Nathan explained the situation succinctly. Miss Daniels is Frederick Daniels' niece and heir. She's inquiring about his property. Mr. Fowler's expression grew serious. I see. Please have a seat. He shuffled through some papers in his desk drawer. Yes, Mr. Daniels did own property, a house and workshop on Cedar Street, plus a small sum in his account here. Catherine's heart lifted. Then these would pass to me as his next of kin. Ordinarily, yes, Mr. Fowler said, his tone causing her hope to falter. However, there's a complication. Mr. Daniels had a mortgage on the property. When he passed, the payments stopped. I'm afraid the property is in default. Catherine's hands tightened in her lap. I see. How much is owed? Mr. Fowler named a sum that made her heart sink. It was far more than the $12 in her reticule. There is some good news, the banker continued. The account balance would cover about half the remaining debt, and the property itself has value. If you could manage to pay the difference within, say, 30 days, you could retain ownership. Nathan, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Would the bank consider an extension? Miss Daniels has only just arrived and learned of her uncle's passing. Mr. Fowler looked uncomfortable. I would like to accommodate, but bank policy is quite clear. 30 days is already stretching the rules. Katherine straightened her shoulders. Thank you for explaining, Mr. Fowler. May I at least see the property before making any decisions? Of course. The banker nodded. It's been vacant since Mr. Daniels' passing. I have the key here. He removed a heavy iron key from his desk drawer and handed it to her. Cedar Street is 3 blocks east, then 2 north. It's the blue house with the separate workshop behind it. Outside the bank, Katherine stood blinking in the bright sunlight, the key heavy in her palm. Would you like to see it now? Nathan asked quietly. Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked in silence through the town, turning onto Cedar Street, a quieter residential area with modest homes set back from the dusty road. Her uncle's house was small but well-maintained, with a neat front yard and a covered porch. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable: 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a good stove, a parlor with bookshelves lining one wall. Everything was dusty but otherwise untouched, as if Frederick Daniels might return at any moment. He lived well, Katherine murmured, running her fingers along the spines of the books, many on carpentry and design, others poetry and history. Would you like to see the workshop? Nathan asked. Behind the house stood a larger structure, her uncle's carpentry shop. Inside, tools hung in careful order on the walls. Half-finished projects waited on workbenches. The scent of sawdust and varnish lingered in the air. He was building a cradle, Nathan observed, gesturing to one workbench where the curved pieces of a baby's cradle were partially assembled. Probably for the Hendersons. They're expecting their first child next month. Katherine felt a lump form in her throat. This had been her uncle's life, his books, his craft, his service to his community. And now it would all be lost because she couldn't afford to save it. It's a good property, Nathan said, watching her expression carefully. Worth more than what's owed on it. Perhaps, Katherine agreed, but that doesn't help me now. She looked around the workshop one last time, then squared her shoulders. I should get back to the boarding house. Mrs. Buchanan will be expecting me to help with lunch preparations. They walked in silence for several minutes before Nathan spoke again. Miss Daniels, I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I might have a solution to your dilemma. Katherine glanced at him curiously. What sort of solution? Nathan hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. The mercantile is doing well, but I find myself short-handed. I've been considering hiring an assistant for some time. Hope flickered in Katherine's chest. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Taylor? I am. The position would include managing inventory, helping customers, and keeping the ledgers. The pay would be enough to cover the mortgage payments while allowing you to continue at Mrs. Buchanan's. He looked straight ahead as he spoke, not meeting her eyes. You seem capable and educated. I believe you would be an asset to the store. Catherine's mind raced. The offer was unexpected but potentially the answer to her most pressing problem. Still, something in his manner made her wonder if there was more to it. This is very generous, Mr. Taylor. May I ask why you would do this for someone you've only just met? Nathan finally looked at her, his expression earnest. Your uncle was respected, as I said, but more than that, he paused, seeming to struggle with his words. I came to Columbus with nothing 5 years ago. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. I believe in passing that kindness forward. The sincerity in his voice convinced her. Then I accept your offer with gratitude, Mr. Taylor. Relief crossed his features. Good. You can start tomorrow if that suits you. They had reached the boarding house. Katherine turned to him on the front steps. Thank you, not just for the position, but for everything since I arrived. I'm not sure what I would have done without your help. For the first time since they'd met, Nathan smiled, fully a warm expression that transformed his serious features and reached his eyes. You would have managed, Miss Daniels. You strike me as a woman of considerable resourcefulness. He tipped his hat. Until tomorrow, then. As Katherine watched him walk away, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Nathan Taylor was becoming much more than just her benefactor. He was becoming someone she looked forward to seeing each day. The next few weeks established a new rhythm to Katherine's life in Columbus. Mornings and evenings were spent assisting Mrs. Buchanan at the boarding house, while her days were devoted to learning the operations of Taylor's mercantile. Nathan proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the inventory system, introducing her to regular customers, and gradually entrusting her with more responsibilities. Katherine discovered she had a talent for retail. Her experience as a seamstress gave her knowledge of fabrics and notions that the female customers appreciated, while her quick mind and facility with numbers impressed the men who came in for tools and supplies. Within 2 weeks, Nathan was comfortable leaving her in charge while he made supply runs to larger towns or delivered orders to outlying ranches. You're a natural, he told her one evening as they reviewed the day's sales. The store's takings are up 15% since you started. Katherine smiled, pleased by the compliment. The ladies appreciate having another woman to consult about their purchases, and I've been suggesting complimentary items they might not have considered. Nathan nodded approvingly. I noticed Mrs. Harding bought both the blue gingham and the matching thread and buttons today. She's making a dress for her daughter's birthday, Katherine explained. I showed her how the buttons would catch the light nicely against the fabric. They worked in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, Katherine recording the day's transactions in the ledger while Nathan counted the cash box. These quiet moments at day's end had become her favorite part of working at the mercantile, just the two of them, the store silent except for the scratch of her pen and the occasional comment or question. Have you visited your uncle's house again? Nathan asked, breaking the companionable silence. Katherine nodded. Yesterday afternoon. I'm trying to go every few days to air it out and begin cleaning. It seems wrong to leave it sitting empty. You plan to live there eventually, she hesitated. The question had been on her mind as well. I think I would like to. It would be more private than the boarding house, but Mrs. Buchanan has been so kind, I wouldn't want to leave her without help. I'm sure she would understand, Nathan said. Especially since you've made the first mortgage payment already. Katherine smiled at the reminder. Her first paycheck from the mercantile, combined with the small sum in her uncle's account, had been enough to make the initial payment to the bank. Mr. Fowler had seemed pleasantly surprised by her promptness. "It feels good to be establishing myself here," she admitted. "Though I do miss teaching sometimes." Nathan looked up from the cash box. "Have you spoken with Mrs. Riley at the school?" Katherine shook her head. "No, should I have? She mentioned last week that they're considering adding another teacher next term. The town's growing and there are more children of school age each year." Excitement flared in Katherine's chest. "That would be wonderful, though," she glanced around the store. "I would miss this place and working with you." Their eyes met across the counter, and something unspoken passed between them. Nathan cleared his throat and looked away first. "You would be an excellent teacher, Miss Daniels. The children of Columbus would be fortunate to have you." The moment passed, but Katherine found herself thinking of it later as she walked back to the boarding house in the gathering twilight. Her relationship with Nathan had remained strictly professional, despite the growing warmth between them. He was unfailingly polite, respectful of her space and opinions, and genuinely supportive of her growing independence in Columbus. Yet there were moments like tonight when she sensed something more beneath the surface. A lingering glance, a smile that came more readily than before. Small kindnesses that went beyond what an employer might offer an employee. Mrs. Buchanan had certainly noticed. "That young man brings you home personally more often than not," she observed one evening after Nathan had walked Katherine to the boarding house door. "And I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." "Mr. Taylor is simply being gentlemanly," Katherine had protested, though her cheeks warmed at the older woman's knowing look. "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Buchanan had replied with a smile that suggested she knew better. Now, as Katherine approached the boarding house, she was surprised to see Nathan's sister Margaret sitting on the porch with Mrs. Buchanan. The young woman had finally arrived in Columbus the previous week, a petite, lively blonde with her brother's direct gaze but a more open manner. "Katherine," Margaret called, waving enthusiastically. "Come sit with us. Mrs. Buchanan has been telling me all about the town's history." Katherine joined them on the porch, accepting the glass of lemonade Mrs. Buchanan pressed into her hand. "I didn't expect to see you this evening, Margaret." "Nathan is having dinner with Mr. Fowler to discuss expanding the store," Margaret explained. "Business matters that would bore me to tears, so I thought I'd come visit you instead." In the short time since her arrival, Margaret had attached herself to Katherine with an enthusiasm that was both flattering and slightly overwhelming. She seemed determined that they should be the best of friends, and Katherine found her energy and straightforward nature refreshing after the more reserved personalities that dominated Columbus society. "Katherine, you must come to dinner tomorrow night," Margaret continued. "Nathan's cooking is surprisingly good for a bachelor, and I'm dying for company other than my brother." Mrs. Buchanan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Katherine hesitated, aware that dining at a single man's home, even with his sister present, might raise eyebrows in the small community. "I wouldn't want to impose," she began. "Nonsense." Margaret dismissed her concern with a wave. "Nathan specifically said I should invite you. I think he's tired of just talking to me too." Mrs. Buchanan cleared her throat. "Perhaps Katherine could bring one of my peach pies as a contribution to the meal." This tacit approval from the arbiter of Columbus propriety settled the matter. "In that case, I'd be delighted to come," Katherine agreed. Margaret clapped her hands together. "Wonderful. 6 o'clock tomorrow. I'll finally get to hear what Nathan is like as an employer. He refuses to discuss the store with me, says it would be improper to talk business with a lady." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "As if I haven't been managing my own household accounts for years." Katherine laughed. "Your brother is quite traditional in some ways. In all ways, Margaret corrected with a snort. Sometimes I think he was born in the wrong century. Her expression softened. Though he has been different since you arrived, Catherine, more animated. Before Catherine could respond to this intriguing observation, Mrs. Buchanan stood. I should check on supper. Margaret, will you be joining us? Thank you, but no, Nathan expects me back. Margaret rose gracefully. Until tomorrow, Catherine. As Margaret departed, Mrs. Buchanan gave Catherine a significant look. Dinner at the Taylor house. How interesting. Catherine felt her cheeks warm again. It's just a friendly invitation, Mrs. Buchanan. Of course it is, dear. The older woman patted her arm. But a young man doesn't invite a young woman to his home sister present, or not unless he has more than friendship on his mind. The following evening, Catherine found herself standing on the porch of Nathan's house at the edge of town, a freshly baked peach pie in her hands and butterflies in her stomach. The house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and carefully tended garden that spoke of its owner's attention to detail. Margaret opened the door before Catherine could knock. You're here. Come in, come in. Oh, is that pie, Nathan? Catherine brought pie. Nathan appeared from what must be the kitchen, wiping his hands on a cloth. Good evening, Miss Daniels. His smile was warm but contained a hint of nervousness that Catherine found endearing. Thank you for accepting Margaret's invitation. Thank you both for having me, Catherine replied, suddenly aware that this was the first time they'd interacted outside the mercantile or her uncle's property. Somehow, standing in his home made their relationship feel more personal, less defined by their working arrangement. Nathan's house reflected its owner, practical, well-ordered, with occasional touches of unexpected beauty. Bookshelves lined one wall of the sitting room, filled with volumes on business, history, and surprisingly, poetry. A polished pine table in the dining room held a vase of wildflowers and was set with simple but elegant dishes. Nathan did all the cooking, Margaret announced as they sat down to a meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh vegetables. He won't let me near the kitchen after I nearly burned down our parents' house trying to make breakfast when I was 12. Nathan's expression was a mixture of exasperation and affection. You were trying to surprise Mother on her birthday. Your intentions were good, even if your execution was somewhat flawed. Margaret grinned. Story of my life. She turned to Catherine. What about you? Any kitchen disasters in your past? The evening flowed easily after that, with conversation moving from childhood memories to books they'd read to local Columbus gossip. Catherine found herself relaxing, enjoying the warm, familial atmosphere that the Taylor siblings created. Nathan was different here, more animated, as Margaret had suggested, with a dry wit that emerged more frequently than it did at the mercantile. After dinner, Margaret insisted on clearing the dishes herself. You two go sit on the porch. It's a lovely evening, and I want to prove I can handle simple household tasks without catastrophe. The porch faced west, offering a view of the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Catherine and Nathan sat in comfortable rocking chairs, watching the spectacle in companionable silence for several minutes. Thank you for coming tonight, Nathan said finally. Margaret has been eager for female companionship. She finds Columbus rather quiet after El Paso. She's delightful, Catherine said honestly. So full of life. Nathan nodded. She's always been that way. Even after losing Thomas, her spirit remains undimmed. He glanced at Catherine. You've faced loss as well, yet you've shown remarkable resilience since coming to Columbus. I've had help, Catherine pointed out softly. You've been exceptionally kind. It's not kindness, Nathan said, his voice low and earnest. You've earned everything through your own merit. The position at the store, the customers' respect, the mortgage payments, those are all the result of your own efforts. His words warmed her more than she would have expected. Still, you gave me the opportunity. I won't forget that. They fell silent again, watching as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. I've been thinking, Nathan said after a moment, about your interest in teaching. Katherine turned to him, curious. Yes, Mrs. Riley confirmed yesterday that the school board has approved funding for another teacher, starting next term. He hesitated. I took the liberty of mentioning your qualifications to her. She's interested in speaking with you. Catherine's heart leapt. Truly? Oh, Nathan, that would be wonderful. In her excitement, she reached across the space between their chairs and squeezed his hand. The moment her fingers touched his, something electric passed between them. Nathan's eyes widened slightly, his gaze dropping to their joined hands. Katherine started to pull away, embarrassed by her impulsive action, but Nathan gently tightened his fingers around hers. I would miss seeing you at the store every day, he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers again. But I know teaching is your passion. Catherine's breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. I would miss the store too, and working with you. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. Nathan leaned slightly toward her, and Katherine found herself doing the same, drawn by some invisible force that made her heart race. The screen door squeaked open, breaking the moment. Pie time, Margaret announced cheerfully, oblivious to what she had interrupted. I've made coffee too. Nathan released Catherine's hand and sat back in his chair. The connection was broken, but something fundamental had changed between them. As they enjoyed Mrs. Buchanan's peach pie under the emerging stars, Katherine caught Nathan watching her several times, his expression thoughtful and warm. Later, as Nathan walked her back to the boarding house, a comfortable silence stretched between them. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. The streets of Columbus were quiet, most businesses closed for the evening, only the saloon showing lights and activity. I enjoyed this evening, Katherine said as they approached the boarding house. Your home is lovely. It's been a bachelor's dwelling for too long, Nathan replied. Margaret has already started making changes, curtains, cushions, flowers on every surface. Katherine smiled. Women do tend to soften the edges. They reached the boarding house steps, and Katherine turned to face him, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you for walking me home. It was my pleasure. Nathan hesitated, then added, Mrs. Riley will be at the Mercantile tomorrow afternoon. She's quite eager to meet you. I'll be prepared, Katherine promised, touched again by his thoughtfulness. Nathan nodded, his expression serious in the dim light from the boarding house windows. Miss Daniels, Katherine, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. I want you to know that whatever you decide about the teaching position, your place at the Mercantile remains secure. I wouldn't want you to feel that you must choose one opportunity over the other out of obligation. The statement revealed a sensitivity to her situation that moved Katherine deeply. Thank you. That means a great deal to me. Nathan took a half step closer. You've become important to Columbus in a very short time, to the Mercantile. Another slight pause. To me. The admission hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Katherine's heart beat faster as Nathan's gaze held hers. You've become important to me as well, she said softly. For a moment she thought he might take her hand again or perhaps even kiss her. Instead, he smiled, a gentle, private smile that felt like a promise. Good night, Katherine. Good night, Nathan. As she watched him walk away, Katherine felt a certainty settling over her. Columbus, New Mexico territory, with its dusty streets and frontier challenges, had become more than just a place of refuge. It was becoming home. And Nathan Taylor, the kind stranger who had offered his hand when no one else appeared at the depot, was becoming far more than just her employer. The following weeks brought significant changes to Katherine's life in Columbus. Her interview with Mrs. Riley, the head teacher at the town school, was successful, resulting in an offer to begin teaching the younger children when the new term started in September, still 2 months away. This allowed Katherine to continue working full-time at the Mercantile through the summer while preparing teaching materials in her spare time. With her combined income from the Mercantile and Mrs. Buchanan's boarding house, Katherine managed to make the remaining mortgage payments on her uncle's property. By the end of July, she had legal ownership of the house and workshop, a milestone she celebrated with a small dinner party that included the Taylors, Mrs. Buchanan, and Mr. and Mrs. Riley. To Katherine, Nathan toasted, raising his glass in the dining room of what was now truly her home, who has accomplished more in 3 months than most could in 3 years. "Hear, hear," echoed the other guests while Katherine blushed at the praise. "I had help," she reminded them. "From everyone in this room." "Nonsense," Mrs. Buchanan declared. "You've worked harder than anyone I know. Why, the amount of sewing you've done for my boarders alone would exhaust most women, and that's on top of your work at the store. And now you'll be shaping the minds of our children," Mrs. Riley added approvingly. "Columbus is fortunate to have you, my dear." After dinner, while the others chatted in the parlor, Katherine found herself alone with Nathan in the kitchen, washing dishes. "You don't need to help," she protested as he rolled up his sleeves. "You're a guest." "I'm not much good at sitting and making small talk," Nathan admitted, taking a plate from her to dry. "Besides, I wanted a moment to speak with you privately." Katherine's heart skipped a beat. Since that evening on his porch, there had been a subtle shift in their relationship. Nothing overt, Nathan remained respectful and professional at the Mercantile, but there were moments of connection that hadn't existed before. A lingering glance, his hand steadying her elbow as she climbed a ladder to reach high shelves. Walking her home most evenings, their conversations extending beyond business to personal hopes and memories. "What did you want to discuss?" she asked, passing him another clean plate. Nathan set the dried plate aside carefully. "With you starting at the school in September, I'll need to find a replacement at the Mercantile." "Oh," Katherine felt a surprising pang of disappointment. "Yes, of course. I was thinking of offering Margaret the position. This was unexpected." "Margaret." "But she's never mentioned an interest in the Mercantile." Nathan smiled slightly. "She hasn't to you, perhaps, but she's been pestering me about it since she arrived. She managed her husband's affairs at the fort and has a good head for business. I think she's bored, to be honest." "I think she would be excellent," Katherine said, genuinely pleased at the idea of Margaret taking her place. "The customers already adore her." "There's another matter," Nathan continued, his tone becoming more serious. "Your uncle's workshop." Katherine glanced through the window toward the separate building behind the house. "What about it? It's a shame to see it sitting empty when it's so well equipped. I know you've been cleaning it, but have you considered what you might do with it?" Katherine sighed. "I've thought about it often. I don't have my uncle's skills, though I wish I did. It seems wrong to sell the tools and equipment when he cared for them so meticulously." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "What if someone were to use the space, perhaps pay you a modest rent? You know someone who needs a workshop?" Katherine asked, curious about the direction of the conversation. "Actually, I do." Nathan set down his dish towel and turned to face her directly. "Me?" Katherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You?" "But the Mercantile is doing well, thanks in part to your contributions," Nathan finished for her. "But before I came to Columbus, I was a furniture maker in Missouri. It's what I truly love doing, but establishing the Mercantile had to come first, a steady income to build upon." This revelation stunned Katherine. I had no idea. It's not something I discuss often, Nathan admitted, but seeing your uncle's workshop has awakened that old desire. With Margaret helping at the store, I might have time to pursue it again, perhaps 1 or 2 days a week to start. I would be delighted to have you use the workshop, Katherine said immediately. And I wouldn't dream of charging you rent after everything you've done for me. Nathan shook his head firmly. I insist on paying a fair price. This is a business arrangement, not a favor. Something in his tone made Katherine study him more carefully. Is that important to you, that our arrangements be proper and businesslike? Nathan met her gaze steadily. I think it's important that you never feel indebted to me, Katherine. That any personal feelings that might develop between us are separate from our professional connections. The directness of his statement took her breath away. This was the closest either of them had come to acknowledging the growing attraction between them. I understand, she said softly. And I appreciate your consideration. The workshop is yours to use and we can discuss fair terms later. A smile of relief crossed Nathan's features. Thank you. Their eyes held for a long moment before Mrs. Buchanan's voice called from the parlor, breaking the spell. Katherine, do you have any more of that delicious coffee? The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, though Katherine found her thoughts continually returning to her conversation with Nathan in the kitchen. His careful attention to the boundaries between their professional and personal relationships touched her deeply. So many men would have used her initial vulnerability to create a sense of obligation. Nathan had done the opposite, consistently empowering her independence. As summer progressed toward fall, Columbus experienced a heat wave that left the town dusty and irritable. The mercantile remained busy, with Margaret proving to be a quick study as she prepared to take over Katherine's responsibilities. Nathan began spending Wednesdays at the workshop, emerging with sawdust in his hair and a contentment in his expression that Katherine found deeply attractive. The changes in their professional lives created more space for their personal relationship to develop. Nathan began calling at the house on Sunday afternoons, sometimes bringing Margaret, other times coming alone. They would sit on the porch drinking lemonade, discussing books, or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. On one particularly sweltering August afternoon, Katherine was working alone in the mercantile, Nathan having gone to meet a supply wagon, and Margaret visiting friends outside town when the door opened, admitting a well-dressed stranger. The man was tall, handsome in a conventional way, with an air of self-importance that immediately put Katherine on alert. "Good afternoon, sir," she greeted him professionally. "Welcome to Taylor's Mercantile. How may I assist you?" The man removed his hat, revealing neatly combed dark hair. "I'm looking for Katherine Daniels. I was told she might be found here." Surprise and wariness mingled in Katherine's chest. "I am Katherine Daniels." The stranger's eyebrows rose, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her uncomfortable. Well. When they said Fred Daniels' niece had settled in Columbus, I pictured someone more provincial. "You knew my uncle?" Katherine asked, ignoring the implied compliment. "Knew of him, more accurately." "I'm Howard Blackwell from the Western Land and Development Company." He offered his card with a flourish. "I'm here about your property on Cedar Street." Katherine accepted the card automatically, her confusion growing. "My property isn't for sale, Mr. Blackwell." Blackwell smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything has a price, Miss Daniels. My company is acquiring parcels throughout Columbus for a significant development project. We're prepared to offer you a very generous sum for your house and the adjacent workshop." "As I said, I'm not interested in selling," Katherine repeated firmly. "Perhaps you should hear the offer before deciding," Blackwell persisted. naming a figure that momentarily took Catherine's breath away. It was indeed generous enough to establish her comfortably almost anywhere she might wish to go. "That's a substantial amount," she acknowledged, "but my answer remains the same. The house was my uncle's home for many years. It's now mine, and I intend to keep it." Blackwell's pleasant expression hardened slightly. "Miss Daniels, our company has already acquired several properties in Columbus. This development will proceed with or without your participation. Those who cooperate early receive the best terms." The implied threat wasn't lost on Katherine. "Is that so? And what happens to those who choose not to sell? Life can become difficult for individuals who stand in the way of progress," Blackwell said smoothly. "Accidents happen. Property values decline when surrounded by construction. It's simply practical to accept a good offer when it's presented." Before Katherine could respond to this thinly veiled intimidation, the mercantile door opened again, and Nathan entered. He took in the scene, Katherine's tense posture, Blackwell's looming presence, and immediately moved to her side. "Is everything all right, Katherine? Mr. Taylor, I presume?" Blackwell extended his hand, which Nathan pointedly did not take. "Howard Blackwell, Western Land and Development. I was just discussing a business proposition with Miss Daniels. He wants to buy my house and workshop," Katherine explained, grateful for Nathan's steady presence. "I declined." Nathan's expression remained neutral, but Katherine noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. "Miss Daniels has made her position clear, Mr. Blackwell. I believe your business here is concluded." Blackwell's smile disappeared entirely. "This doesn't concern you, Taylor." "Any attempt to pressure or intimidate residents of Columbus concerns me greatly," Nathan replied, his voice deceptively calm, "particularly when those residents are friends of mine." The two men stared at each other for a tense moment before Blackwell replaced his hat. "Think about my offer, Miss Daniels. I'll be in town for several days." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And do consider what I said about accidents. Columbus can be a dangerous place for those who don't understand how things work." After he left, Nathan turned to Katherine, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right? Did he threaten you?" "Not directly," Katherine said, still shaken by the encounter, "but the implication was clear enough." Nathan's expression darkened. "Blackwell and his company have been buying properties throughout the territory. There are rumors about their methods, none of them honorable." "He offered a substantial amount," Katherine admitted, "more than the property is worth. But you declined." "Of course." She looked up at him, surprised he would even question her decision. "That house is my home now. And the workshop," she stopped, realizing she had nearly said, "is yours," which wasn't strictly true. "The workshop has sentimental value." Something softened in Nathan's expression. "We should speak to Sheriff Donovan about Blackwell's implied threats, and I think perhaps you shouldn't be alone for the next few days until he leaves town." The concern in his voice warmed her. "I'll be careful," she promised. That evening, after closing the mercantile, Nathan insisted on walking Katherine home despite the oppressive heat. The setting sun had done little to cool the air, which remained thick and still, promising another uncomfortable night. "I've spoken with Sheriff Donovan," Nathan told her as they walked. "He's aware of Blackwell's presence and will keep an eye on your property. He also suggested you stay with Mrs. Buchanan until Blackwell leaves town." Katherine shook her head firmly. "I won't be driven from my own home by threats and intimidation. That would only show weakness." Nathan sighed, though a hint of admiration showed in his expression. "I expected you might say that. In that case, would you object if I stayed in your uncle's workshop for a few nights?" "Just as a precaution." The suggestion surprised her. "You want to sleep in the workshop?" "There's a cot there already," Nathan pointed out. Your uncle must have used it occasionally when working late. I would be close enough to hear anything unusual, but not. He hesitated. It would be proper. No one could question your reputation. Katherine felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness, even as a small part of her wondered what it would be like to have him closer in the house itself, rather than the separate workshop. The thought sent a flush of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. I would feel safer knowing you were nearby, she admitted. When they reached her house, Katherine unlocked the door and then hesitated on the threshold. Would you like to come in? I could make some iced tea. Nathan shook his head regretfully. I should return to the store for my bedroll and some supplies if I'm to stay in the workshop tonight. His expression grew serious. Lock your doors and windows, Katherine. I'll be back within the hour. True to his word, Nathan returned as twilight deepened into night, carrying a bedroll and small bag of provisions. Katherine watched from her window as he entered the workshop, a lantern glowing softly through its windows as he settled in for the night. The knowledge of his protective presence nearby allowed her to sleep more soundly than she might have otherwise. The next 3 days established a new pattern. Nathan would arrive at the mercantile early, having walked from Katherine's workshop where he spent the night. Margaret, who had been informed of the situation, took to accompanying Katherine whenever Nathan couldn't be present. In the evenings, the three would often share a meal at Katherine's house before Margaret returned to her brother's home and Nathan retired to the workshop. On the 4th evening, as they finished a simple supper of cold chicken and salad, a commotion outside drew their attention. Shouts and the smell of smoke sent them rushing to the porch, where they were met with a terrifying sight. The workshop was ablaze, flames licking up the wooden walls and black smoke billowing into the twilight sky. "No," Katherine cried, starting forward, but Nathan caught her arm. "Stay here," he ordered, then sprinted toward the burning building. Margaret gripped Katherine's hand. "The fire brigade, we need to ring the alarm bell." As if in answer to her words, the town's fire bell began to clang urgently in the distance. Neighbors were already emerging from their homes, forming a bucket line from the nearest well to the workshop. Katherine watched in horror as Nathan disappeared into the smoke, emerging moments later with an armful of tools and equipment. Again and again he entered the burning building, salvaging what he could until Sheriff Donovan physically restrained him. "It's too far gone, Taylor. You'll kill yourself." The fire brigade arrived, but as the sheriff had said, it was too late to save the structure. They focused their efforts on preventing the flames from spreading to Katherine's house and neighboring properties. Katherine stood frozen, watching the destruction of her uncle's legacy. The tools might be replaced, but the craftsmanship embodied in that workshop, the years of skill and devotion, were irreplaceable. A voice behind her cut through her shock. "Unfortunate accident. Old buildings like that are always fire hazards." She turned to find Howard Blackwell observing the conflagration with a satisfied expression. The implication was unmistakable. This was no accident. "You did this," she accused, her voice shaking with rage and grief. Blackwell affected an expression of shock. "What a terrible accusation, Miss Daniels. I merely came to see if I could be of assistance when I heard the commotion." His voice lowered. "Perhaps now you'll reconsider my offer. After all, the value of your property has just diminished considerably." Before Katherine could respond, Nathan appeared at her side, his face streaked with soot, eyes hard as he took in Blackwell's presence. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm simply offering my condolences on this tragic accident," Blackwell replied smoothly. Nathan took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "There was nothing accidental about this fire." Sheriff Donovan approached, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. "Everything all right here, Sheriff?" Blackwell greeted him with exaggerated cordiality. "Just expressing my sympathies to Miss Daniels on her misfortune. Misfortune that conveniently occurred after she refused to sell to your company," Nathan pointed out. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Is that so, Mr. Blackwell?" Blackwell's smile thinned. "I don't know what Taylor is implying, but I had nothing to do with this unfortunate incident." He tipped his hat. "Good evening to you all. Miss Daniels, my offer remains open should you reconsider." As he walked away, Sheriff Donovan turned to Katherine. "Did he threaten you directly, Miss Daniels? I need something solid if I'm to hold him." Katherine shook her head reluctantly. "Nothing direct, Sheriff, just implications." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I'll keep an eye on him until he leaves town. And I'll look into this fire, though proving arson is difficult without witnesses." After the sheriff left, Katherine surveyed the smoldering ruins of the workshop, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Nathan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Katherine. If I hadn't been at the store late, I might have prevented this." She turned to him, distressed by the guilt in his voice. "This isn't your fault, Nathan. You could have been hurt or killed if you'd been inside when it started." His expression remained troubled. "The tools I managed to save are in your yard. Many were damaged by the heat or water, but some might be salvageable." Katherine nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Margaret approached, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You'll stay with us tonight," she said firmly. "Both of you. This has been enough excitement for one evening." Too exhausted to argue, Katherine allowed herself to be led away from the scene of destruction. The walk to Nathan's house passed in a blur, and she found herself sitting at his kitchen table, a cup of strong tea in her hands, with little memory of how she'd gotten there. "Here," Margaret said, pressing a handkerchief into her hand. "You look like you could use this." Katherine realized her face was still wet with tears. She wiped them away, trying to regain her composure. "Thank you. I'm sorry to impose on you both." "Don't be ridiculous," Margaret said briskly. "That's what friends are for." Nathan had disappeared briefly to clean up and change his soot-stained clothes. When he returned, his expression was still grim, but he seemed calmer. "Sheriff Donovan just stopped by," he reported. "He stationed a deputy near Blackwell's hotel room. He also confirmed that your house appears untouched, though he recommends you not stay there tonight." Katherine nodded gratefully. "I appreciate his concern, and yours." She looked between the siblings. "Both of yours." "What will you do now?" Margaret asked gently. Katherine straightened her shoulders. "Rebuild, of course." The decision crystallized as she spoke it. "The workshop was important to my uncle. I won't let Blackwell or his company erase that legacy." Nathan studied her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Admiration, certainly, but something deeper as well. "It would be expensive to rebuild, and dangerous if Blackwell decides to escalate." "I have savings," Katherine countered. "And I won't be intimidated out of my home or my principles." A smile slowly spread across Nathan's face. "No, I don't imagine you would be." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to help with the rebuilding if you'll allow it." Margaret looked between them, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "I think I'll turn in," she announced, standing abruptly. "Katherine, you can take my room. I'll bunk with Nathan." After Margaret's departure, a charged silence filled the kitchen. Katherine was acutely aware of being alone with Nathan in his home, late at night, a situation that would raise eyebrows in Columbus if known, sister in the house or not. "You don't have to rebuild the workshop right away," Nathan said finally. "Or at all, if you don't want to. Don't feel obligated because of your uncle or—" he hesitated, "or because of my interest in using it." Katherine shook her head. "It's not obligation. That workshop represented something important: craftsmanship, independence, creating something of lasting value. She met his gaze directly. Values I've come to associate with Columbus, with the life I'm building here. Nathan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I admire your courage, Katherine. From the moment you arrived at that depot with no one waiting for you, you faced every challenge with grace and determination. The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her. I wasn't entirely alone, she reminded him softly. You were there. Their eyes held, the connection between them deepening in the quiet kitchen. Nathan's thumb moved gently across her knuckles, the simple caress sending a shiver up her arm. Katherine, he said, his voice low and serious, I need to tell you something. Her heart quickened at his tone. Yes. When I saw the workshop on fire tonight, my first thought wasn't for the tools or the building. His eyes held hers steadily. It was fear that you might be inside or that the fire might spread to your house. I realized then how much you've come to mean to me. Katherine's breath caught. Nathan, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. I know this isn't the right time with everything that's happened. I just needed you to know that you're not alone in Columbus, not as long as I'm here. The simple promise meant more to Katherine than any flowery declaration might have. Thank you, she whispered, turning her hand to lace her fingers with his. They sat like that for several minutes, the silence between them comfortable and full of unspoken meaning. Finally, Katherine reluctantly withdrew her hand. I should try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. Nathan nodded, rising to his feet. Margaret left some night clothes for you in her room. If you need anything in the night, don't hesitate to ask. As Katherine prepared for bed in Margaret's small but cozy room, she found her thoughts alternating between the destruction of the workshop and the warmth of Nathan's hand holding hers. Grief and hope intertwined, much like the complicated threads that had brought her to Columbus in the first place. She slept fitfully, waking at dawn with renewed determination. Whatever Blackwell's intent had been in destroying the workshop, he would not succeed in driving her away. Columbus was her home now, and she would fight for it. At breakfast, Nathan informed her that he'd arranged for several men from town to help clear the workshop debris later that day. The community is behind you, Katherine. Blackwell's tactics have only strengthened their resolve. Katherine was deeply touched by this show of support. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Margaret assured her, pouring coffee. Columbus takes care of its own, and you're definitely one of us now. After breakfast, Nathan walked Katherine back to her house to survey the damage in daylight. The workshop was a blackened skeleton, but as the sheriff had indicated, her home remained untouched. The tools Nathan had rescued were piled in the yard, many damaged beyond repair, but some still salvageable. As they stood contemplating the ruins, a wagon approached and Sheriff Donovan stepped down, his expression grimly satisfied. Morning, folks. Thought you'd want to know Blackwell left town on the early stage, rather suddenly, according to the hotel clerk. Did you find any evidence linking him to the fire? Nathan asked. The sheriff shook his head. Nothing that would stand up in court, but I did send telegrams to several other towns where his company has been operating. Seems there's a pattern of accidents befalling property owners who refuse to sell. He tipped his hat to Katherine. You're not the first to stand your ground, Miss Daniels, but you might be the first to have the whole town behind you. After the sheriff departed, Nathan turned to Katherine. With Blackwell gone, the immediate danger has passed, but his company might try again. Western Land and Development doesn't give up easily. Katherine nodded, resolute. Then we'll be prepared. I won't be scared away from the home and life I'm building here. Nathan's expression softened. No, I don't imagine you will be. He hesitated, then added, "Katherine, about what I said last night." "You don't need to explain," she interrupted gently. "Or apologize if that's what you were about to do." "Apologize?" Nathan looked genuinely surprised. "That's not what I intended at all." He took a deep breath. "What I wanted to say is that I care for you deeply, more than I've cared for anyone before. I know the timing is terrible with everything that's happened, but I don't want to wait any longer to tell you how I feel." Catherine's heart soared at his words. "Nathan, please, let me finish," he said, his voice earnest. "When I saw you at the depot that day, alone and uncertain but holding your head high, something inside me recognized you not just as someone who needed help, but as someone exceptional. These past months have only confirmed that first impression." He took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "I love you, Katherine. I believe I started falling in love with you that very first day, when you had the courage to come with me, a complete stranger, because it was the right choice for your future." Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she said simply. "You've become my anchor in Columbus, Nathan. Not because you rescued me, though you did, but because you immediately set about ensuring I could rescue myself." Nathan's smile was radiant as he drew her gently closer. "May I kiss you, Katherine Daniels?" "I wish you would, Nathan Taylor," she whispered. Their first kiss was gentle but filled with promise, the culmination of months of growing affection and the beginning of something deeper. When they finally parted, Katherine kept her hands resting on Nathan's shoulders, unwilling to step away from the circle of his arms. "What happens now?" she asked. Nathan's expression grew serious. "First, we rebuild your workshop. Then, if you're willing, I'd like to court you properly with Margaret as chaperone to satisfy Mrs. Buchanan's sense of propriety." His lips quirked in a smile. "And then, when the time is right, I hope to build a life with you that's even stronger than any workshop." Catherine's heart filled with happiness. "I would like that very much." As the sun rose higher over Columbus, casting its light on both the ruins of the past and the promise of the future, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not just in this frontier town, but in the heart of the man who had been waiting at the depot when she needed him most. The rebuilding of the workshop became a community effort. Farmers and ranchers from the surrounding area donated lumber. The blacksmith repaired what tools could be salvaged. Men from town volunteered their labor, and women brought food to sustain the workers. What had begun as a personal tragedy transformed into a symbol of Columbus's solidarity against outside threats. Katherine divided her time between helping at the mercantile, preparing for the upcoming school term, and overseeing the reconstruction. Nathan spent every available moment at the building site, his expertise as a furniture maker proving invaluable in the workshop's design. By mid-September, just as Katherine began her teaching position, the new workshop stood complete, larger and sturdier than the original, with improved ventilation and better storage for tools and materials. On the evening after the final work was completed, Katherine and Nathan stood together admiring the structure as the setting sun gilded its fresh planed boards. "It's even better than before," Katherine said, leaning comfortably against Nathan's side, his arm around her shoulders. "Your uncle would be proud," Nathan agreed. "Not just of the workshop, but of you, how you've made your place here." The school term had started successfully, with Katherine's 12 students already showing attachment to their new teacher. She maintained her sewing work for Mrs. Buchanan's boarders in the evenings and helped at the mercantile on Saturdays, while Nathan divided his time between the store and pursuing his passion for furniture making in the new workshop. Their courtship progressed with the blessing of the community. Sunday afternoons often found them walking together after church, sometimes accompanied by Margaret, other times chaperoned by Mrs. Buchanan's knowing presence. Evening meals were frequently shared between the three households: Nathan's, Katherine's, and Mrs. Buchanan's, creating a warm, extended family that filled a void Katherine hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. As autumn deepened toward winter, Nathan spent more time in the workshop, often working late into the evening. Katherine noticed his increased dedication, but attributed it to the approaching holiday season and potential orders for Christmas gifts. One crisp November Saturday, Katherine was helping Margaret at the mercantile when Nathan entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Katherine, could you come with me? There's something I'd like to show you." Margaret shooed them both toward the door. "Go on. I can manage here." Nathan led Katherine through town toward her house, saying little but frequently glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. When they reached the workshop, he hesitated at the door. "I've been working on something special," he explained. "A surprise for you." Intrigued, Katherine allowed him to guide her inside. The workshop was filled with the pleasant scents of freshly cut wood and linseed oil. Sunlight streamed through the new windows, illuminating the space where her uncle had once created his masterpieces, and where Nathan now continued that tradition. In the center of the room, covered with a cloth, stood what appeared to be a large piece of furniture. Nathan led her to it, then paused, his expression a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. "Before I show you this, I should explain," he began. "When we met at the depot that day, I had no idea how completely you would transform my life. I came to Columbus to build a business, thinking that would be enough. You showed me that a life needs more than just work to be truly fulfilling." Katherine's heart began to beat faster as he continued. "The mercantile was my foundation, but it was never my passion. This," he gestured around the workshop, "working with my hands to create something lasting, something beautiful, this is what I love. You gave that back to me, Katherine. You encouraged me to reclaim that part of myself." He took a deep breath, then removed the cloth covering the furniture piece. Katherine gasped. Before her stood the most beautiful desk she had ever seen, crafted of rich cherry wood with inlays of lighter maple forming delicate patterns along the edges. The proportions were perfect, the joinery flawless. The top was divided into compartments for papers, pens, and ink, with small drawers for storing personal items. "Nathan, it's exquisite," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." "It's a teacher's desk," Nathan explained, his voice soft with emotion. "For your classroom. I've already spoken with Mrs. Riley about installing it next week." Katherine was overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I don't know what to say. The craftsmanship is remarkable." "There's one more thing," Nathan said, reaching for her hand. "This drawer here," he guided her fingers to a small drawer in the center of the desk, "has a special feature." Katherine pulled the drawer open curiously. Inside, nestled on a small velvet cushion, lay a ring, a delicate gold band with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Her breath caught as Nathan dropped to one knee beside her, still holding her hand. "Katherine Daniels, you came to Columbus looking for a fresh start, and in the process, you gave me one as well. You've brought joy, purpose, and love into my life. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of happiness filled Katherine's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Nathan. With all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was a promise of partnership, of home, of a future built together. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you," he replied. "From the moment I said come with me at that depot, Some part of me knew we were meant to walk through life together. Margaret was ecstatic when they shared the news, hugging them both with enthusiastic affection. Mrs. Buchanan pretended surprise but admitted she'd seen it coming since June. The announcement at church the following day was met with sincere congratulations from the community that had welcomed Katherine so warmly. They were married on Christmas Eve, 1885, in Columbus's small church, with Margaret as Katherine's attendant and Mr. Fowler from the bank standing up for Nathan. Mrs. Buchanan outdid herself preparing the wedding supper, served in the boarding house dining room decorated with evergreens and candles. Katherine wore a dress of deep blue velvet sewn by her own hands with her mother's lace collar as something old. After the celebration, Nathan brought his bride to their house on Cedar Street, now thoroughly renovated to accommodate them both. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, and on the kitchen table stood a small wedding cake Margaret had secretly prepared. "Welcome home, Mrs. Taylor," Nathan said, his voice husky with emotion as he carried her across the threshold. "It feels right," Katherine said, looking around at the home that now reflected both their tastes. Her books beside his on the shelves, his mother's quilt across the back of her father's chair. New furniture Nathan had crafted alongside treasured pieces from her uncle. "It is right," Nathan agreed, drawing her close. "You and I together, it's how things were meant to be from the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach." In the years that followed, their partnership deepened and flourished. Katherine continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a son they named Frederick, after her uncle in the winter of 1887. Nathan's furniture-making business grew alongside the mercantile, with Margaret taking over more responsibility for the store as his reputation as a craftsman spread throughout the territory. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Nathan's mother arrived in the spring of 1889, completing their family. The workshop that had once burned became the heart of Nathan's growing business, while Katherine divided her time between raising their children, assisting with the mercantile's books, and maintaining her connections with Columbus's educational community. Western Land and Development made one more attempt to acquire property in Columbus, sending a different representative a year after Blackwell's departure. This time, the entire town stood united against the company's tactics. When suspicious accidents began occurring again, Sheriff Donovan had witnesses ready. The representative was arrested, and the company finally abandoned its efforts in the area. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Katherine sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Nathan play with their children in the yard. Frederick, now 8, was showing his father how high he could throw a ball, while 5-year-old Elizabeth chased butterflies through the flower beds Katherine had planted. Margaret, who had married the town's new doctor 2 years earlier and lived just down the street, joined Katherine on the porch swing, her own infant son sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how things turned out," Margaret commented, watching her brother and his children. "Nathan was so serious, so focused on the mercantile before you came. I worried he'd never find happiness beyond his work." Katherine smiled, her gaze lingering on her husband's laughing face as he swung Elizabeth up onto his shoulders. "I think about that day at the depot often. How different my life would have been if my uncle had met me as planned, or if someone else had offered help instead of Nathan." "Fate," Margaret said with conviction. "You two were meant to find each other." "Perhaps," Katherine agreed. "Or perhaps it was simply that when life presented an unexpected path, we both had the courage to take it." Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Katherine and Nathan sat together on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders. Her head leaned against him, the easy intimacy of a decade of love and partnership. 10 years ago today, I arrived in Columbus, Katherine said softly. Did you know that? Nathan's arm tightened around her. I remember the date well. The day my life truly began. She turned to look at him, this man who had been stranger, benefactor, friend, and finally beloved husband. Thank you for being at that depot, for saying those words that changed everything. Come with me, he quoted, his voice tender with memory. Best words I ever spoke. Their kiss was gentle, infused with the depth of feeling that comes from years of shared joys and sorrows, challenges faced together, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. The stars emerged above Columbus, New Mexico territory, shining down on the town that had become home to the young woman who had arrived alone and uncertain, and the man who had been waiting not for her, but somehow, precisely for her at the depot on that fateful summer day.